Hello, welcome to Katrina's Creations. This is our Wednesday episode, and today it's going to be a little different. Not that I don't do different a lot, but today is really going to be different because I'm going to make a colonial skirt. I was watching, which you may be thinking, colonial, I do not dress in colonial clothes. Okay, we'll clarify that. I do not walk around in 18th century clothes. That would be kind of weird. However, I was watching a video on how their colonial clothes are constructed. I've really been into watching some seamstresses who sew vintage clothing, and especially like the Victorian, the Edwardian, and the colonial period for here in the US. And so I've just kind of found that fascinating lately to watch. I don't know why. It's just been an interest lately. So before I start with the colonial clothing, I thought I would talk a little bit about, I thought it'd just be interesting to just show you a picture of my great-grandmother's wedding dress. Now, she was married during the Edwardian time here in the US, but the Edwardian time would have run from 1901 after the death of Queen Victoria until the death of Edward, who was her son. He took over as King of England from 1901 or 02, I forget which. I believe it's 1901, until his death in 1911. So during that short 10-year period, it was called the Edwardian period. And it's also during the time of the Titanic, that's during you get the idea, general time period. So anyway, that's when my grandmother was married. Our great-grandmother was married in 1909. And so I actually have a picture of her wedding dress. And it's interesting because it's constructed in two separate pieces. One is an underdress, and then there was almost like a jumper that went over the top of it. So when you see the picture, the part that has sleeves is actually the underdress, and then the other went over top of it. So just kind of different construction from what we would have today. So I thought I'd show that just as a quick little insert, just so you could see some vintage clothing. So that's Edwardian clothing. Victorian clothing would have been, of course, during the time of Queen Victoria. So you had various styles of hoop skirts and bustles. I carry my own bustle with me naturally. It's along behind me all the time. I would like to get rid of my bustle, but that isn't happening right now. But we're working on it. But but they were into a lot of the hoop skirts. Although hoop skirts could hide so much. I could hide my hips permanently and never worry about a diet if I had hoop skirts. Yeah, anyway, that's not going to happen either. So I was, like I said, watching these vintage sewists. I keep trying to call it sewer, but if you look at it written, sewer looks like sewer, and that would be bad. So we will refer to them as sewists or seamstresses. So I was watching these people sew clothing. Now, there's no way I would ever tackle anything as involved as some of the Victorian clothing, and I'm not going to be walking around in anything with hoop skirts. That's not happening at all, as I said. But Edwardian clothing, we do wear modified versions of Edwardian clothing, and we don't even really know it. If you remember in the 1980s, a lot of our shirts had ruffles that kind of went down the front seams, like almost the princess seams. That's Victorian. That is Victorian style. And we had the wide shoulders, and we had the short little cropped shirts. You still see cropped shirts now, but I remember having things like that and wearing things in the 80s. And our A-line skirts also remind me a lot of the Edwardian walking skirts. That's the first style that you really see an A-line come out, is during that time period. But now into the colonial clothing. I was watching this lady make a skirt and thought, the way this is assembled is genius. It's like the first version of a wraparound skirt. There are no buttons, no zippers, no elastic. It's tied on, and it's not a drawstring. So I just thought it was interesting. So let me explain what it is first, and how it's constructed, and then I'm going to show you what I'm doing with it. All right, bear with my lack of artistic endeavor. It's not my strong point, but this is a basic clothing style that would have been popular in the mid-1700s. And if you go to Colonial Williamsburg or you go to Sturbridge Village, you will see everyday people wearing this type of an outfit. What it was made of was, let's see if I can get this a little closer. First, a person would wear what was called a shift or a chemise. And you can see it's popping through on her sleeves right here. That's about the only part of it you can actually see. It was pretty much a slip with long sleeves. It was made out of cotton or linen, and it was your pajamas, but it was also acted as a slip during the day. It was worn next to your clothing to protect your clothing from your body, because they weren't washing their clothes as often as we wash our clothes now. So you would wear that, and then over top of that, you would wear a corset. This right in here is not her corset, but she would put a corset on over top of the chemise or slip, and then for modesty, they would tuck a kerchief into the neckline and tuck it down into the corset. Then over top of the corset, they would wear what was called stays or laces, and that's what you see right in between this colored in area right here where it crisscrosses. And it was almost like a cover to the corset itself. And because the jacket that she would wear didn't close all the way in the center usually, sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't, they would put this in as it was decorative and to keep people from seeing your corset underneath. So it was kind of a corset cover. And then a lot of times they would wear a short jacket on top of all of this. And it generally came to just below the elbow. And if you notice, it's not on the shoulders at all. It would come right to the edge of your shoulders. There's no shoulder seam. It would literally just kind of hang on the edge of your shoulder. I'm not quite sure why it didn't fall off, but they would pull it across and they would pin it down the front, or if it was left open, you would see the corset cover underneath. But the skirt is what we're focusing on. And so now I'm going to show you how they would make this skirt. The skirt was just based on two rectangular pieces that they would gather across the top, and then they would measure it. It was a front and a back, so two rectangular pieces gathered or pleated across the top of it, and then across the top of that, once it was gathered or pleated, they would put a waistband that had extra ties on that extended past the skirt on the front and the back. So when they would wear this skirt, it was seamed on the side, but it was not seamed like the first 5 or 6 inches from the top. It was left open, and this is where it would overlap. So you would tie the back on, and there's the tie for the back, and then you would pull the front on and tie it in the back. And then it would leave this overlapped section here, which would just be left like an open slit. Because it's overlapping, you're not going to see her chemise or slip underneath. But she could slide her hand into this slit and get to pockets that she would tie on. They wore a pocket underneath this. They were not in the clothing. The pockets were tied on, similar to a toolman's the handyman tool belts that are cloth. The pockets are very similar to that, and they would wear that underneath the skirt, between the skirt and the slip, and then they could slip their hands into this and then into the pocket from there. So that's what I'm going to be making. Now there's no real pattern involved in doing this. It's more of a math formula. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to take my measurements around the waist. I'm going to divide that in half. And then I'm going to add 2 1/4 inches on each side. 2 inches to allow for the overlap and 1/4 inch to allow for the seam allowance. And then I'm going to make a waistband with ties that extend past the edge of the skirt that would be allowance enough to tie around me. So I'll give you an example. Now, these are not my measurements. I wish they were, but it's not. But we'll just do this for an example. If you had a waist that is 35 inches around, you divide it by 2, that's going to be 17. You want to have an overlap of about 1.5 to 2 inches on each side so that, your skirt or your slip underneath isn't going to show. So in order to do that, you're going to add an extra 1.5 to 2 inches on each side of that 17 inches. So we'll go with an easy number and say 2 inches on each side. And that would be 21 inches. Okay, and then we'll add an extra 1/4 inch on each side for seam allowance. So that would take it to 21.5 inches that I'm going to make for the front and the back of the skirt. So I would gather my rectangular material and gather it up or pleat it to the point where it measures out to 21.5 inches. All right, now to figure out how long I'm going to need to make the waistband, I have a formula written here. Now this is based if you were 35 inches. We know that your skirt panel is 21.5. Remember, this is front and back, so this would be like if you were just doing the front. So for each side, 21.5 inches for the skirt panel, and then we divide 17 in half, gives us 8.5, which will take the waistband to the center of your stomach or your back, depending on which panel you're making. But then you've got to have enough left over of that waistband to tie it into a bow. So we're going to add an additional 10 inches to each side. So you are going to have the center panel, which is 21.5 inches, and then you're going to have 18.5 inches beyond that on each side of that skirt panel for a total of 48.5 inches is what you're going to make your waistband. So that way you know what size to cut it. So I'm going to get this started and show you what it looks like. I now have all this gathered and to the right width, and I have measured where the center is of my gathering, and I just did this by just folding the skirt in half, and I've spread the gathers out so they are even all the way across. And now I have the waistband. Now I have the right side facing me. Now this material, as you can see, is anything but colonial looking. We're just using it for the pattern. So I have the waistband, and this material is very hard to tell the front from the back. This is the back, and it's just slightly less vibrant as the front. It's kind of a tie-dyed material. So I have the front facing me. So this is the right side of the fabric. I have a pin in the center, and now I'm going to pin right sides together. This is the waistband, and here's my pin here, and I'm going to pin the two together, and then I'm going to evenly pin all the way down both sides. Now when I get to this end here, again, remember this is the right side is facing you. You're going to tuck this under, away from you, 1/4 inch, because this is going to be for your seam allowance, and you don't want a rough seam at the side of your skirt. So you're going to slightly fold this over at about 1/4 inch, which is your seam allowance, and pin your waistband all the way across. I have one side that I've done, so let me show you that. So this is one that's done, and you can see I have it pinned all the way across, and at the end here, I have folded this side away from me 1/4 inch, and my tie runs out beyond that. Now I'm going to sew on the sewing machine right across my gathers, which are right here at the top, and I'm going to sew across just the skirt panel, and then when I finish that, we'll come back and I'll show you what I'm doing then. now have the waistband attached. You can see it. You can see it right here. Now, those of you who sew all the time are probably going to cringe at what I do next, but remember these skirts are not worn with the waistband out. They are worn with a shirt over top of the waistband, so no one's ever going to see. So instead of hand stitching this, normally you would take this waistband and you would flip it over like in half and then in half again, and then you would blind stitch this so that none of the stitching shows, like this. I am going to fold this over and pin it, but I'm going to sew right over top of this because, as I said, no one's ever going to see this because I'll be wearing a shirt over top of it. So why not make life easier for me? So I'm going to do that, and then when I get to the ties here, I'm going to be doing the same thing. I'm going to be, you can see this side is already up because it's of course been stitched into the skirt. So I'm going to fold this over here, fold it over and sew right along here and create my ties at the same time. You do need to remember when you get to the end here to fold it over. Here's the wrong side. This is the right side. You're going to fold it over a little bit before you fold twice here to do the seaming. That way you have a nice neat edge here, not a raw edge. So I have one that I have already pinned, and I'll show you what it looks like. Here you can see it. And like I said, normally it would be hand stitched so that none of the stitching shows, so that it looks like that all the way around. But I'm going to stitch right over top of it, and here are my ties. And you can see at the end here I have pinned it and turned it under so I have a nice smooth edge, no, not a raw edge there. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this up, and then I will have my 2 panels done, and then I'll show you how to connect them. Both of my panels sewn. You can see what the waistband looks like here, and here are my ties on both sides. Oops, and there's a string I forgot to trim. Now I'm going to put the 2 panels with the right sides facing each other. So what's facing out is going to be the wrong side, and I'm going to make sure that the waistband is lined up. I'm going to make sure that the waistband is lined up together, and I'm going to pin the side of the skirt. Now, I am not going to sew from the waistband down to about the first about 6 inches. So I'm going to start my pin right here, and I'm going to sew this down. This will be the section that allows to overlap. And if you were wearing this as a colonial dress, you would put your hand in through here to reach into your pocket. So I'm going to sew the 2 sides of the skirt, and then we will see what it looks like. All right, I am going to model my colonial pattern skirt. The design of itself is not colonial at all. Now let me show you what the finished pattern looks like. Here is my front, and the back is just like it. And then on the sides, I have it split open right here, and there is a tie on each side, and the other side is just like it. So I'm going to put this on tie it from the back to the front and then tie the front to the back. So I'm going to step back so I can do this, and I am already wearing a skirt just for modesty's sake. So let's go back and I'll try it. So I just step into the skirt, try not to step on the skirt, and then I take the two ties that are in the back, as you can see here, and I'm going to bring them around and tie them just in a bow in the front. Then I'm going to take the front with the two ties and put it on and tie it in a bow in the back. And then by the time I pull my skirt over top of it, you have no idea that there is actually bows holding it up. And there is my skirt. I'll come closer so you can see it. There it is. I actually made this a little fuller than it needed to be. Now, take into consideration it's a little bulky because I have a skirt underneath it. But here's where it actually would lap over top. And there is the slit right here that I could put my hand in to get to a pocket if I wore a pocket like underneath my skirt, as they did, which I'm not. So there it is. I have a nice gathered, sort of an A-line skirt. I think next time I would probably pleat instead of gather it because, like I said, it's a little fuller than it really needed to be. But it does the job. So I hope you have enjoyed this. If you have, please give me a thumbs up, and I will see you again on Saturday. Thanks again for watching.